And on the carbon price, it actually puts more money in the pockets of 8 out of 10 Canadian families. That's a parliamentary budget officer who says that. It's absolutely true.
Was part of the crowd booing him?
Yep. Welcome back to Northern Perspective, everyone. I'm Cypher.
And I'm Fox. Justin Trudeau and his Liberals may not be listening to Canadians, but municipal leaders sure are. Yesterday, Trudeau took questions from various leaders at the Federal Canadian Municipalities Annual Conference in Calgary, Alberta. His answers were not exactly popular with the crowd.
Let's take a look.
Hello. The question is, over the last 10 years, you've added over $1 trillion in debt to our national economy. That comes along with a price tag of approximately $32.3 billion in debt servicing costs per year, which if we divided that money between every municipality in Canada, every single municipality, small and large, would have an additional $9 million. And since we all know that the budget will not balance itself, when are you going to balance the budget?
Excellent.
Excellent. Yeah. You know, it is an excellent question. And it's nice to hear people putting these direct questions to Trudeau, calling him out on his 2015 crap that he was running his campaign with. So yeah, if you'd actually taken this money and not thrown it down the drain, you could have given $9 million to literally every town in Canada. Now, that might not mean something for places as big as Montreal or Vancouver, but it sure as heck would, mean something for the really small rural towns out there, and I think that's the point. So let's see what Mr. Excellent has to say.
Well, listen, I really appreciate the question because it gives me an opportunity to sort of highlight some of the things about how the Canadian economy is doing. There are the three largest AAA-rated economies in the world are the United States, Germany, and Canada. We have a AAA rating because international bond rating agencies look at Canada's economy, look at our fiscal situations of both federal and subnational provincial governments, and say that is on a sustainable track. We have the lowest deficit of any economy in the G7, the largest industrialized economies, and we have the lowest debt to GDP ratio of any country in the G7. So what that means is our economy macroeconomically is doing better than just about anyone else out there, and companies around the world are seeing that because since 2015, we've seen a 60% increase in direct investment in Canada across the country, from Volkswagen to others. But we've also, just last year, we were the third largest country in the world in absolute terms after the US and Brazil for foreign direct investment. So companies from around the world are coming to invest in Canada because they see it as a good investment in the future. Now, I've said all that to say the Canadian economy is in stellar position from a macroeconomic level, but the reality that all of you know is that Canadians are squeezed right now. We're faced with grocery prices that are too high, rents that are too high, mortgage payments that are too high. We're faced with challenges around fuel and heating costs that are really hurting ordinary families. So what we did, I'll talk about the carbon tax a little later if I get a question on that, but right now I'm talking about how we're going to support with affordability. So we made the decision that if the federal government has a really strong fiscal position, which we do, by all independent analysts and experts, what better to do with that strong fiscal position than to invest in the things that Canadians need? So we're delivering dental care to over 100,000 seniors over the past month who've gotten dental care for the first time, many of them in years. We're delivering pharmacare over the coming years to make insulin free in this country and provide prescription contraceptives for free to women across this country. We're stepping up with $10 a day childcare right across the country because that's an economic program and a social program. We're stepping up with student food programs, national food policies for school. Going to lift 400,000 kids into better nutritionist spaces. We made the conscious and deliberate decision to say, if the Canadian economy is as strong as it is right now, which it is, we need to put that in service of helping Canadians with the cost of living right now without increasing inflation. And that's why the Bank of Canada was able to just drop the rate on Wednesday, because inflation is coming down and now interest rates are going to come down as well. So that was a choice we made. And in parenthesis, every single one of those programs, dental, pharma, childcare, are things that the Conservative Party chose to vote against because they're worried that inflation was too high. Well, we're dropping inflation and we're being there for Canadians, not with cuts and austerity, and we're going to keep doing that. And on the carbon price, it actually puts more money in the pockets of 8 out of 10 Canadian families. That's a parliamentary budget officer who says that. It's absolutely true.
Was part of the crowd booing him?
Yep. And it's because all of these people know that what he's saying is complete garbage. And in the words of Luke Skywalker, that's amazing. Everything you just said was wrong. So we're not going to go into a deep dive about this because we have on previous videos. So what he keeps saying is a built on toothpicks type of approach in describing the Canadian economy. What he keeps referring to is that we have a AAA rating. Yeah, sure, we have a AAA rating. Who cares? You can't live in a AAA rating, as Fox says. But where does that AAA credit rating come from? Well, it comes from his other stat that he likes to throw out there. We have the best GDP to debt ratio in the G7. Well, listen.
We don't. And the reason we don't is because when we are calculating that debt to GDP ratio, Canada includes the Canadian pension plan as part of our assets. So that money belongs to Canadians. It doesn't belong to the government. That's
Right.
our money.
Right. So when you have organizations that are evaluating the credit rating of countries, they evaluate it very similar to a credit rating of your home. A government and country has revenue coming in. You have wages coming in. A government has debt that it carries. You have debt that you carry. A government has assets and you have assets. So when a bank says, do I loan Cypher and Fox any money? They take a look and say, do they have a house? Do they have a car? Do they have a trailer? Do they have all these things that are counting as assets? Well, the issue is that these rating agencies are including, because Trudeau is having them include it, the CPP has an asset to offset our debt. And that's why they're saying, everything's great. Well, no, it isn't, because you don't get to use the CPP to offset that debt in the real world. And in the video that we did, and we'll put that link in the description, when you take that away, we're actually at the bottom. It does not look good for us. And why do you keep having economists saying, we're concerned about the Canadian economy? Fox read something recently that said we only added 25,000 new jobs
Yeah,
last
it was
month.
about 2650 or 26,500, I should say correctly. And of course, we've added way more new Canadians to the country in that time. And this is the issue, is that the government keeps bringing people into the country, doesn't care whether or not jobs are being created for them, doesn't care whether or not they'll have jobs when they get here. And the issue is that there are no jobs for Canadians who are here already.
Right. And as a consequence, the unemployment rate went up again. Surprise, surprise. When you're not adding enough jobs to support the people coming in the country, you're going to have people that are out of work. So, and then he ended there with the carbon tax. Oh my goodness. Like, again, just look at your bank account. You know. You absolutely know. So yeah, the Conservatives didn't want to spend money on pharmacare, on daycare, and on these other programs because we can't afford it.
Well, it would be like me saying to Cypher, I want a super fancy car and a mink coat and, a 50-carat diamond ring. Like, just all these ridiculous, frivolous things that we obviously cannot afford.
Yeah.
Like,
it's the same thing.
It's asinine. You wouldn't run a household this way. How can someone run the country this way?
Good afternoon, Karina Williams, Reeve, Northern Sunrise County. Prime Minister, I would like to know if you have been in person to the North Peace region of Alberta to actually see our oil and gas industry. If so, where and when? Because your misinformation continues, which I am confident would not be the case if you experience the true clean industry for yourself, and that way we would not need the carbon tax. Thank you.
Prime Minister.
I've visited Fort McMurray and the oil sands many times over the years, but I haven't been to that particular region. You're absolutely right. But I do know how important the energy industry is to this country. And I say energy writ large because oil and gas has been a strong driver of the national economy for many, many decades. When Alberta does well, Canada does well. And that's just a basic truth. And that's something that we need to make sure we're continuing. The issue, though, excuse me, ma'am, the issue is that the world is choosing to reduce its carbon emissions right now. Investment is flowing where carbon emissions are being reduced. And we want to make sure that we continue to be part of providing energy solutions to the world. The oil sands were a technological innovation to get energy out of the oil sands. It took technology to figure it out. There's a technological problem we're having right now of reducing carbon emissions around the world because the world is warming at an alarming rate. We need to respond to the challenges of climate change, and quite frankly, we need to make sure that the energy industry in Alberta is not just able to reduce its emissions, but able to innovate so there are more good jobs for Albertan energy workers for decades to come, even as the world becomes less reliant on oil and gas. That is the situation we're facing right now. It's not me who's decided that the world is changing the way we consume energy. That's happening. And if Alberta and Canada are going to be part of that transformation and indeed benefit from continuing to provide energy to the world, we have to continue to invest in transforming and reducing our emissions while we continue to provide energy to the world. And the price on pollution, the carbon tax, is an important part of that. It has been designed so that 8 out of 10 families get more money back every year from that price on pollution than it actually costs them. That's the core math of it. It's a way of driving down our emissions while we prepare for a stronger economy of the future. And I know Albertans want to protect our environment for future generations like all Canadians do, and that's what we're going to continue to do together.
Don't you love that attempt at pandering to the Alberta crowd?
Oh, of course, because he knows that they're projected to get 0 seats there, if I'm not mistaken.
Right. I think they're, yeah.
Like, there's, 36, 38 seats now in Alberta? Like, there's a lot of seats in Alberta, and he's projected to get 0, I'm almost positive.
So, here he is saying that, oh, well, when Alberta does well, Canada does well, which is correct. And he's also saying, well, I haven't been to that region. And he's also saying, but, this is all the more reason why we need to make investments in transforming. Okay, so what he's saying is investments in transforming, the energy sector. He's saying, well, basically sunset oil and gas. That's what he's saying.
Well, and I love how he's like, the world is trying to reduce carbon emissions. No, they're not.
Ask China.
Yeah, what are China, India, and the United States doing? Because they're the big three. They make up 50% of the world's carbon emissions. What are they doing?
Like the U.S. is going down, but China is going up exponentially. Well, India is going up exponentially.
And can you blame them? In those countries, there is still extreme poverty. And in order to get people out of poverty, They are using coal. They are using natural gas. They are creating carbon emissions. Can you blame them? No. And it's not going to stop. So by us bringing our carbon footprint down, it's not going to stop the forward momentum of countries like India and China.
Yeah, our total carbon footprint, China increases their total in 1 year. Like there you go.
So why are we putting Canadians into poverty? So that other countries can increase their carbon emissions and bring their population out of poverty. None of this makes sense.
No, it's liberal virtue signaling, and they're also basing it on carbon. I don't think you have any idea what drives a climate on a planet, Trudeau, because reducing carbon, that's not the problem if there was one. And even so, if that was the problem, Canada reducing our 1.6% to zero, net zero, never mind all of our trees and everything else that's offsetting it, that would make zero difference on a macro. That's not going to stop your alleged forest fires that you claim to be caused by climate change. So, like, dude, stop gaslighting Canadians and let us get the gas out of the ground.
Thank you. Tansei, hello, Mr. Prime Minister. The question is in relation to the one you just heard. First, I would like to acknowledge what a privilege it is that I get to speak with you today. I am Tony Head, a city councillor from Prince Albert, Saskatchewan. That is a job the residents of Prince Albert selected me for the past 4 years, a job I humbly accepted, and I hope I get entrusted with it again. But here, with you, I want to address something more close to my heart, something that is a part of my heart. I want to say I'm a proud Indigenous man and a member of Lac La Ronge Indian Band. I arrived here in this beautiful city on the eve of a terrifying water main break. I was happy to see the quick and comprehensive response, but it also brought me much sadness. I was reminded of my friends living on reserves in Saskatchewan, my family in Manitoba, who can't turn on their taps and pour themselves a glass of water, ever. I know adults who have never been able to pour themselves a glass of water from the tap in their own home. Here in Calgary and in my home in Prince Albert and in many non-Indigenous communities in Canada, really, having clean water in every kitchen and bathroom is considered necessary. In very many Indigenous communities, for very many of my friends and family, it's nothing short of a luxury. My question to you is this: why is this okay? In this beautiful, wealthy, developed, free country, why is it okay for my people to go without water? And I know that work is being done, but I also know that it's being done at the speed of molasses. It's not considered an emergency, not like the water main break in here in Calgary.
And you know what? If Trudeau really wants to talk about reconciliation with Indigenous communities, that's what he needs to focus on. Not a holiday, not surfing, not reading out, land acknowledgements that, at the beginning of every meeting. That doesn't do anything. Okay?
Yeah, but talk is cheap. That's the reason he does it. That's the reason he does things like designates a day or has land acknowledgements at the beginning of ceremonies and meetings. It's because it's cheap, it's easy, and unfortunately, it doesn't do anything practical.
No, and we've talked about this before. You really want to help Indigenous people? Give them clean water.
Well, and why in a country like Canada are there communities without clean, potable water?
And the guy actually summed it up very, very succinctly. Why is this okay?
Ansay, thank you. Thank you for that. Like I said, it's not acceptable. And that is why we made the commitment to end the boil water advisories and why we have ended so many of them and why we are going to be ending all of them. It is an issue that has many different aspects to it. That we're dealing with entirely. You can't just plonk down a new water treatment plant. It involves training up people so the local community can actually continue to run it. It means ongoing investments. It means a sustainable long-term future. And these are the investments we're making to lift boil water advisories and keep them lifted for decades to come. It's not going as fast as anyone would like, but it is unacceptable. And I thank you for bringing that forward.
Wow, what a terrible answer.
That was a terrible answer. Pretty much like, oh, well, we're not going to make water treatment plants because, they're expensive and we have to train people.
No, I took it more as, dude, we're going as fast as we can.
as fast as we want to.
But again, look at what he spends money on. Like, this is the problem. There's something called prioritization.
Well, no, it's because he spends money on the things that he thinks will get him the most votes the fastest. I mean, how large do you suppose these communities are that are without drinking water?
Right.
They're probably not huge, right? And that's why they were able to correct the mistake that happened in Calgary so quickly, because there's a lot of people that live there. But these small communities, it's been going on forever because they're small. What's 200 votes to a guy like Trudeau? You know what I mean? I think that's the reason. I'm not saying this is an acceptable reason. I think it's garbage, but I think that is the reason.
I think you're right.
Honorable Prime Minister, thank you for being here. My name is Jimmy Hassan. I'm from Kingston, City Councillor. My question is different than my colleagues have been asking it. With many other problems, the Ontarian and the Canadian are suffering with shortage of family health physicians. In my city only, 28,000 people, seniors, children, women, has no doctor. And we are not near to even think that we're going to have a doctor soon and we're going to deal with this issue as a municipality. Knowing this is not a municipality issue, it's not a federal issue. But I'm urging you as a proud Canadian and proud Kingstonian that if you can step up and start a blue ribbon program, hire the doctor from other countries, train them, and give it to the province and force them to take it so you can serve these Canadians who need that health services, who gave the life to work for this country. Now they're looking at you and your government to provide them the health services. I will appreciate that if you can step up, being our Prime Minister and, help us to take us out of this problem as well.
Correct me if I'm wrong, Fox, but wasn't that a conservative idea?
Yeah, it was. And I'm very curious to see the Prime Minister's response. Will he say that it's a bad idea? Will he try to steal it? Will he try to, quote unquote, improve upon it?
Or will he say, oh, well, we've been working on this for years?
Let's find out.
We absolutely agree. Access to primary care, access to physicians is fundamentally important. It's the gateway into the healthcare system. If you can't see a primary doctor, you can't then see a specialist. People showing up in emergency rooms, which is more expensive and less efficient. People need primary care doctors. That is why that was a core element of the $200 billion worth of investments that we announced last year in agreements with the provinces over the next 10 years. There are key metrics that have to be hit have to be shared in terms of how many Canadians have access to primary care physicians. And we're going to see results on that because the provinces are going to be held to that by citizens and municipal leaders and journalists and academics and ordinary Canadians who are frustrated that they can't access family doctors. Yes, on accelerated accreditation, there are things that the federal government can do and is doing to make sure we're bringing in more doctors, but ultimately it is to the provincial bodies to actually approve the accreditation in their medical health systems. We're putting pressures on the provinces, but the more all of us can put pressures on the provinces to get more primary health care physicians in our system, the better off we're all going to be. We need to see those results. Federal government is going to show up and keep putting pressure on it, but we need the provinces to continue to deliver the right kind of health care for Canadians.
So, there it is. Oh yeah, we've been working on this. Sure you have.
Well, and to be fair, healthcare is primarily a provincial responsibility, but that does not mean that the federal government cannot assist, usually with money.
Well, and they can introduce legislation that allows for this. So he didn't directly answer the guy's question. It was actually a pretty simple question. Will you implement the Blue CO program that Pierre Poilievre has talked about many times to allow foreign trained doctors to get accredited and get to work instead of driving cabs and doing these other jobs that are frankly a waste of their training?
Well, and you've all heard the story about my friend who's a nurse, studied in the States, lived in Canada the whole time, just crossed the border every day for school, and got licensed in New York State, tried to bring her license back to Ontario, and it took her over 6 months. And it was in the middle of the pandemic where they were screaming and crying for nurses. Like, there should be some countries where we just go, oh yeah, we'll take that license. You know, like U.S., U.K., Scotland, Ireland, France, even like just most of the European Union plus the United States, we should be taking licenses from those countries like an automatic.
Yep, but instead, all of them go south.
Right, because it's easier.
So, anyway, so that was the that was the Q&A period at the FCM, and interesting that it was in Calgary, Alberta. And the interesting thing from I'd say a macro level is the municipalities are proposing these questions, and they're not simple questions. And the questions reflect the state that Pierre has been describing. The Canadians know that Canada is in for the last couple of years. And Trudeau keeps saying, well, you know, Canada is not broken. Yeah, it is. Open your eyes. You don't even need to Google it. Just look.
You know, there may be a lot wrong with the country right now, but that doesn't mean that it can't be fixed. And that doesn't mean that we can't fix it.
Well, the main problem isn't that Canada is broken right now. The problem is that the first step in solving a problem is recognizing that you have one.
Which the Trudeau government refuses to do. They keep telling us about how great things are in Canada.
Right. So Canada is broken. Now, the sooner that he recognizes that, the sooner that we can get to work. Now, the problem is they're not going to recognize that, because that would then be admitting that their government has done a terrible job since 2015.
Right, that they're the ones that broke it. So as a government who's trying to get reelected, to be like, oh yeah, our bad, I guess we were the ones that broke it.
Yeah, whoopsie.
That's not a good look. So, I mean, they just need to get out of the way and let Pierre Poilievre and the Conservatives take over and fix this mess that the Liberals have gotten us into.
Right, because Pierre sees it for what it is. He sees there's a problem. He sees the country is broken. And he's ready to get to work to fix it. So, as Fox said, dude, get the hell out of the way and let's get to work.